No matter how you feel about it, China has always been an influential presence. This makes its history some of the most fascinating of all countries. It's well known that China is the most populous state on the planet, with currently over 1.4 billion people living in this third largest country. But China is also home to the world's largest functioning bell, weighing over 250,000 pounds, and the world's largest outdoor elevator, the Bailong elevator, which carries visitors up to 300 meters up a cliffside. But China began from much more humble beginnings. Evidence suggests proto-humans could have lived in China from at least 2 million years ago. Peking man, a Homo erectus, has been dated from 700 to 800,000 years back. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has been living in the Hunan province since at least 80,000 years ago. We've also discovered proto-writing, some of the earliest on Earth, dated from around 7000 BCE. According to Chinese historians, China's political system emerged around 2100 BCE, with a dynasty known as the Xia. While there is archaeological evidence for this ancient civilization, there's still no definitive proof the Xia existed, or whether it was another culture. The Song dynasty, however, would be the first historians would confirm as existing. Ruling from 1600 BCE, the Song ruled the Yellow River Valley. Their oracle bone script became the basis for later Chinese writing, still in use today. The Zhou conquered the Song dynasty around 1046 BCE, claiming the Song had lost the mandate of heaven, and became the longest-lasting dynasty. After a barbarian invasion around 770 BCE though, the Zhou moved their capital east, becoming rulers in name only, and with feudal warlords taking up power in their own regions. This was a time of chaos, known as the Spring and Autumn period. After these warlords consolidated the smaller cities, there were 7 major states vying for leadership of China by the mid-400s BCE, the Warring States period. It was during these times of uncertainty that philosophies like Confucianism and Taoism emerged. One of the 7 states was the Qin. Under their leader, King Zheng, they conquered the other states one by one, eventually consolidating China and conquering the powerless Zhou by 221 BCE. King Zheng then named himself Qin Shi Huang, or First Emperor of Qin, marking the transition of China into an empire. The Qin could also be where the name for China originated. The emperor instituted a legalist system for China, a strict school of thought that became an early form of authoritarianism. He also had campaigns to the south, against the Yu tribes in the south of China and Vietnam. To the north, he used forced labor to join fortifications, which were built by the warring states to keep out the nomadic invaders from Central Asia and the Eurasian steppe. This became the first iteration of the Great Wall of China. Because of the Qin's harsh rule, they only kept power for 15 years before rebellion. After a civil war, the Han dynasty took control of China around 202 BCE, leading to a golden era. Han became known as the majority ethnicity of China. Their military campaigns expanded China's borders, and this helped them establish the Silk Road to the west. After ruling for hundreds of years, China fell into civil war once again, in 220, until 280 CE. This was known as the period of the Three Kingdoms. By the end of this, one of the 3 kingdoms, the Wei, was overthrown by the Jin, who in turn became caught up in an internal civil war. They would rule most of southern China by around 266 CE. But in the north, the 5 barbarians, or Wu Hu, would invade, and establish the 16 states by the early 300s, a period of instability in the north. In the south, General Liu Yu, of the Song, took power. China was divided between these northern and southern dynasties until 581, when the Sui finally restored order and reunited China under an ethnically Han emperor. The Sui would impose reforms on agriculture and build the largest canal in the world, but like the Qin, their harshness led to civil unrest and a short reign. By 618, the Tang dynasty was in power. This was a second golden age for China. Military campaigns expanded the empire's borders and influence. Traders traveled to Mesopotamia and Africa, making the Chinese capital a truly cosmopolitan urban center. The Tang was significantly weakened though by the Lushan rebellion, and by 907 disintegrated into another period of rival factions. By 960, the Song dynasty recovered most of the pieces and continued China's progress. Under the Song, China became the first state in history to issue paper money backed by the government. They also had massive technological improvements and were the first dynasty to build a standing navy. Despite their economic success, they never stressed a strong military early on, and by the mid-1100s, lost the north to the Jurchen, or Jin dynasty, ancestors of the Manchu. In the early 1200s, the nomadic Mongols began a successful invasion of China. They had taken the Jin territory, and by the 1270s, conquered the Song, and established the Mongol Yuan dynasty. It is estimated anywhere from 20 to 70 million Chinese died during the invasion and subsequent rule, up to half of the whole population. The Yuan wouldn't be in control for long though. By the mid-1300s, the Red Turban rebellions led to the overthrow of the Mongols, and the Ming dynasty took power in 1368. They would be the last emperors that were ethnically Han. The Ming moved the capital to Beijing, building the Forbidden City in the early 1400s, and brought in another golden era. They focused on building one of the best navies in the world, as well as cultural successes in the arts. The famous voyages of Zheng He, the legendary admiral, were sanctioned by the Ming. Confucianism had a resurgence in the form of Neo-Confucianism. After a successful nearly 300-year reign, the Ming's treasury went dry, fending off attacks from the Manchu from the north, and sending aid to Korea during the Japanese invasions. This led to a peasant rebellion which seized Beijing, and the last Ming emperor, Chongzhen, committed suicide in 1644. A Ming general then teamed up with the Manchu, and they managed to take Beijing for themselves, leaving the Manchu Qing dynasty to rule all China. Militarily, China did well during this period, expanding to Mongolia, Tibet, and the West, to become the fourth largest empire in history, only after the British, Mongol, and Russian empires. Culturally, they would stagnate though. As the Manchu were a minority, they used firm authoritarian leadership to clamp down on any dissent against the Qing, including a literary inquisition, which punished and censored writers. They would also strictly enforce isolationist policies. This led to cultural decline. By the mid-1800s, the Qing were embroiled in conflicts with Western powers. The Qing had prohibited the British opium trade into China, resulting in conflict. Because of British technological advancement from the Industrial Revolution, China was thoroughly defeated and forced to cede Hong Kong to the British for 156 years. They also had to open up their ports and give foreign powers extraterritoriality, meaning areas where they were exempt from the local laws. In truth, the Qing faced plenty of unrest during the entire century, with tens of millions losing their lives in the White Lotus Rebellion, an anti-Manchu uprising led by Buddhist monks. The Taiping Rebellion, in which the self-proclaimed brother of Jesus led an uprising which turned into the bloodiest civil war in history. And the Dungan Revolt, led by Chinese Muslims in the West, quickly followed by the Northern Chinese Famine, ending in 1879. The First Sino-Japanese War resulted in a loss of Chinese influence in Joseon Korea, and losing Taiwan to the remodeled Japanese Empire. It was a tough 1800s for the Qing, and only slated to get worse. In 1899, the Boxers, or Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, a secret society of martial artists, rebelled against the foreign occupation and Christian influence. This was known as the Boxer Rebellion, and weakened the Qing even further. This all culminated in 1911, with the Xinhai Revolution, which ended almost 2,000 years of Chinese empire and the establishment of the Republic of China in 1912, with 4-year-old Puyi, the last emperor, abdicating soon after. Sun Yat-sen of the nationalist Kuomintang, or KMT, was provisional president of the new state. By March he gave his position to Yuan Shikai, who by 1915 tried to reinstate the monarchy, and proclaimed himself Emperor of China, but due to internal dissent and declining health, he abdicated in 1916, dying later that same year. This led to a fragmented China, ruled by various warlords. Like the Zhou dynasty, Beijing was still the capital, but had no power over its regions. By the late 1920s, Chiang Kai-shek, of the KMT, along with elements of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, went on a campaign known as the Northern Expedition, to reunify the pieces of China. In 1927 though, the KMT purged its leftist and communist members in the Shanghai Massacre, killing between 5,000 to 10,000. This caused a break between the KMT and Communist Party, which would cause an intermittent civil war, which on paper, is still continuing until this day. The CCP and KMT entered an uneasy alliance in 1937, when Japan invaded, the beginning of World War II in the East, or Second Sino-Japanese War. By the end of the war in 1945, millions of Chinese civilians died at the hands of the Japanese. The UK, USSR, USA, and China were seen as the Big Four allied nations that helped win World War II. Japanese rule over Taiwan was dissolved, and given to the KMT. After World War II, the CCP and KMT recommenced their civil war. The CCP ended up winning, and driving the KMT off of mainland China. They retreated to Taiwan, controlling the island and its surroundings. The mainland now belonged to the CCP, and they created their new state. In 1949, Chairman Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China, or PRC. During the 1950s, the PRC captured Hainan from the KMT, and Tibet. Its large support from the peasants and working class led to major land reforms, in which anywhere from 1 to 2 million landlords were executed. An even more massive reform project was the Great Leap Forward, which was meant to advance beyond an agrarian society to industrialization and state-sanctioned people's communes. Any problems brought up were blamed on counter-revolutionaries, and the negligence led to famine in rural communities. The Great Leap Forward lasted a mere 2 to 4 years, but 15 to 50 million perished. Later, in 1966, Mao began the Cultural Revolution, a movement in which Maoism was to become the dominant ideology, and the older cultural traditions of China, along with all capitalist elements, were to be purged. During these 10 years of upheaval, the PRC was instated into the United Nations, replacing the ROC, leading to a very precarious position for Taiwan, one which we will definitely not be getting into today. Once Mao died in 1976, his successor was Hua Guofeng, a Maoist, but not as hardline as his predecessor. The Cultural Revolution ended, and by 1978, a new leader took power, an elder of the CCP, Deng Xiaoping. Leading more moderately, the PRC slowly disbanded the communes and abandoned a planned economy for a more mixed economy, embracing capitalist elements, and eventually becoming a socialist market economy. The new economy was a stark change for China, where wealth and material possessions were now seen more favorably. While the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests are usually seen as anti-communist, pro-democracy protests, promoting freedom of speech and freedom of the press, there were just as much anxieties about the widening wealth gap and inflation. Using the military, the CCP cracked down on the protests, while other countries denounced and sanctioned the PRC. During the 1990s, China's economy performed incredibly well, becoming the second biggest in the world. This came at a cost, as it harmed much of the environment, leading to environmental, social, and health problems. They also received Hong Kong back from the British, and Macau from the Portuguese. Since then, China has been a controversial figure, as it becomes more prominent on the world stage, especially with its foreign investments and internal human rights issues. China wishes to become fully developed and prosperous by 2049, the centennial of the PRC, but faces a troubled economy, aging population, and gap between rural and urban lifestyles. So what do you think the future of China will be like? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and check out our homepage for all the series in our collection.